right, so Zechariah chapter 11. Zechariah 11. We're going to continue going through the book of Zechariah. We're almost done. Got a couple of chapters to go. And anyways, chapter number 11, in my opinion, is one of the hardest chapters in the Bible to understand. And I say that because of a couple reasons. One is that that gives me a little way out. I was like, well, it's really hard. So if you don't get it, I don't get it. We're both kind of not getting it. The general idea is going to be understood, and there are just a number of things that I don't get. And part of the reason for it is the way in which it's written. Zechariah is a prophet, right? So being a prophet, sometimes prophets would do some weird things. Not because they were weird. I mean, maybe they were weird. Some of the prophets that talked about the things they would do were a little odd. But they lived different lives. For instance, think about Elijah. Elijah goes in and says, it's not going to rain until I say so. And so then he leaves, and he goes, and God says, go stay by a brook, and birds are going to bring you your food. And so they bring him food, and he drinks water from the brook until that brook's gone. And then it says, go to a widow's house, and that widow is going to feed you, even though they're about to die, because all they have left is enough for one more meal. And they keep him for a couple of years. And so it's a little odd. Obviously, Ezekiel had to do some things, some strange things. For instance, at one point, he had to lay down on one side for months. I'm not even sure what that would look like. I mean, I don't know what that meant, like for eating or anything like that, or for other stuff. But the point is that he had to lay down, then he had to turn over and go to the other side, just to prove something. And so I don't know how all that worked out, but they did some strange things. And anyways, Zechariah chapter 11 is going to be similar in that Zechariah, God's going to tell him, I want you to do these things. They're going to illustrate something. Oh, and I forgot I had an object lesson thing. It was just what he had. He has 2 sticks that he's going to use, and I plan on having two staves, and I didn't bring them. So I hope you'll forgive me for that. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started in verse number 1. Zechariah chapter number 11 and verse number 1. And so I know we've said a lot of prophecy is kind of difficult to understand. This is truly, honestly, has been very, very interesting for me to look at. There's been several times where I'm like, okay, I'm ready, and then I'll read like one word. I'm like, what? And literally, I got to one point today. I said, what? I don't know what that word means. I don't know why that word would be said right here. And a friend of mine, Brother Chris Chavez, called me, and he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm studying. He said, you're studying on Wednesday for your Wednesday message? He says, trust me. I told him, trust me, I've been at this for several days, and I'm still struggling with this one. And anyway, so we're here. But he called me, by the way, because they need a big oven delivered to Hoosier Hills tomorrow. And so if anybody wants to think about it, they're like, oh, I have free time, and I want to deliver an oven, we could use your help tomorrow. Anyways, chapter number 11, Zechariah chapter 11, verse number 1. Starting here, open thy doors, O Lebanon, that the fire may devour thy cedars. Howl for a tree, for the cedar is fallen, because the mighty are spoiled. Howl, O ye oaks of Bashan, for the forest of the vintage is come down. Now, how many of you think that's a little bit confusing? So, how many of you like got those 3 verses? I mean, I know, Pastor, of course. Don't you just see it? It's right there. Because I didn't. I read that. I'm like, okay, let's start over. And so I went all the way back to word number 1. It says, open thy doors. Okay, so what we're going to have to do then is we're going to break this portion apart, this chapter. And remember, this is part of the burden of the word of the Lord that started in chapter number 9. It's going to finish here in this chapter. And anyways, the whole book of Zechariah has been actually very encouraging. You remember that Zechariah and Ezra were the 2 prophets that God said were sent. We saw this in the book of Ezra. Ezra and Zechariah were sent specifically to them. They're in Jerusalem to do something. And what was it? Does anybody know what it was? To finish doing something. It wasn't the wall. Nehemiah would be for the wall, but it's to finish building the temple. So they've already built the foundation. And they kind of pause, and so God sends them some urging at the word of 2 prophets, which is Ezra and Zechariah, and they're going to continue it. They're going to build the temple specifically. And so it's been very encouraging. And honestly, as you go through it, it's basically God saying, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna have so many promises and good things. And boy, Jerusalem's gonna be this mighty place again one day. And all these great things are gonna be happening. We see a lot of things happening that he's saying is future. In fact, we look even as far as the millennium, right? So it's not just then. He's saying do it now because here's your blessing. But he's saying future-wise, all the way into millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Christ and the kingdom that is forever. I mean, all those things that are going to be coming about, those are great things. And so anyways, by the time we get to chapter number 11, all these encouraging things suddenly take a screeching halt, and it's kind of discouraging. In fact, what we're going to find in chapter number 11, similar to what we saw a few chapters ago, but a lot more forceful, has to do with why those blessings are there right now. We could say the blessings are not there now. They were not there during the time of Christ. They were not there during this time, even though they're supposed to build these things. And so with this, he is going to give some instruction here in regards to what the problem is. In other words, God is saying, I've got promises, and what I'm going to do is going to be wonderful, but there's a reason why it hasn't happened yet, and you're going to understand why. And so he's going to show them this, and not everybody's going to get it. Only a handful of people. And we saw this started really about 2 chapters ago. We start seeing, actually, I guess through the whole book of Zechariah, you start seeing this word or phrase or little pictures of a remnant. In other words, with Israel, they had pieces of people or groups of people that got it, and not everybody did. And we see this during the time of Jesus Christ, where he's preaching to a whole bunch of people, but not everybody got it. A handful of people did. And so anyways, we're going to look here at chapter number 11, finishing the burden of the word of the Lord from chapter 9 through 11, and then before it opens up to chapter 12 to 14 again, to another burden of the word of the Lord. So quickly here, starting off here, I'm going to basically go through in outline fashion in regards to what this is. This here is going to start with a poetic way of mentioning some of the things that are mentioned here. We could talk about the cedars that are going to be on fire, they're going to be devoured. And it's not, and I don't believe of really powerful forest fire that's going to take place in the area. What he's addressing here is going to be very regional. So there's going to be 3 regions that are going to be mentioned. The first one that's going to be mentioned is Lebanon specifically. And we see this in the first portion, open thy doors, O Lebanon. The idea of open your doors is go ahead and stop resisting. Opening the doors would be more of the idea of the gates of the city or a fortress, and he's saying, let's go ahead, just open up. The concept would be because this is an invasion that's taking place. There's a destruction that's coming. It's an invasion, and he's saying, open up your doors. Now, normally when you're getting invaded, you don't open up your doors. In fact, you close your doors. You sound some alarms. You put some military there. You're going to make sure you defend yourself. But instead for them, he's saying, all right, something bad is going to happen, and what you need to do is open your doors. Jeremiah said the very similar thing back in the book of Jeremiah. There to them in Jerusalem, basically saying, go ahead and open up and let Nebuchadnezzar come in and let them come and destroy. And so he's saying all the way up in Lebanon. Now, Lebanon, this is describing an area north of them in Jerusalem. And my throat is really dry. So I still got, Sunday I said I wasn't feeling 100%. I mean, I'm fine. I feel fine. But I got this, whatever's going on here. And so thankfully the sneezing's kind of gone away. And as well as most of the dust that goes everywhere. My car's staying cleaner a little bit longer. So that's always a good time for rejoicing. All right, sorry. All right, now I'm good again. That'll buy me 10 minutes. So when it comes to what they're saying here is he's describing the first section, which is the northern area, and you're gonna work your way down, if you will. And so you have Lebanon, and it describes it that the fire may devour thy cedars. Now, there's going to be several things that are going to identify geographical areas in those places, specifically Lebanon, which would be a mountainous area there north of Jerusalem, north of the area of Judea, really the area that's dividing Israel with Syria presently. That area is called Lebanon, and so that mountain range that's there. And so anyways, he says that the fire may devour thy cedars. And so this destruction that's going to come in is demonstrated first off as a fire, and it's going to destroy their cedars. Now, when it says thy cedars, it's addressing it poetically. For instance, in our country, we're going to be coming up on 4th of July, and we sing about our country, and we get to enjoy certain things about it. I think it's great. There's nothing wrong with enjoying those things. I think it becomes a problem when we worship our country, and that does. But when it comes to those things, we sing about the purple mountains and the I could have just sang it would have been easier, but the seas of grain and just all those things that are mentioning that identify what areas you're talking about, right? For instance, when you talk about the Purple Mountains Majesties, you're not probably thinking southern Indiana. You understand that's far away, but that's an area, right? The Rocky Mountain Range, we know that. And the sea, the shining sea, all those identifiers for regions. And for them, Lebanon was identified by these mighty trees. And these trees specifically mentioned in verse number 1 is the cedars. These cedars were gigantic. And there's several passages of Scripture throughout the Old Testament that addresses the cedars of Lebanon, and always addressing their great power and something that identified them, what they provided, building materials. In fact, much of the material for the building of the temple were the cedars of Lebanon specifically that contracted out. These cedars would get up to 100, 150 feet tall. I mean, they were really, really big trees. And so anyways, with that, they're going to be destroyed. So part of it is the great, not because Lebanon was some mighty nation at this point, but literally addressing the fact that these are the big trees that he's toppling down with this great fire, this rage, this judgment that's coming. The next part is going to be verse 2, howl fir trees. Now, a fir tree, you might call a cypress, for instance. You might even call it a Christmas tree. You know, those types of trees. These evergreens are not, they're not very intimidating. So imagine a 150-foot cedar, and then you have a little Christmas tree. You understand that that little tree doesn't, you don't, a lot of times you see the cedars, you won't even notice the Christmas trees around it just because the big thing takes attention. And so once the big one goes down, the little ones, you're toast. I mean, once the big trees are down, the little ones are going to be gone. And so anyways, the concept would be here that the smaller trees ought to howl. In other words, this is a desperation. This is a fear, this howling in fear because of what's going to happen. This wailing that should take place. For the cedar is fallen, because the mighty are spoiled. And so it's demonstrating that. The spoiling or the destroying or the robbing of the mighty, basically things being taken from them. Howl, O ye oaks. O ye oaks of Bashan. I'm not really sure. I don't think I said it out loud when I was studying. I've said it many times in my head, though. And I've said it in the past. I just kind of wing it. But anyways, this area is going to be a little further down. The concept here, when you have the fir trees, would be areas, once again, dotting now closer to Israel. Bashan would be the area just east of the Jordan River. And you can even look up pictures. I saw a lot of pictures. In fact, I probably have some on my computer right now of the big oak trees that are found on the east side of the Jordan River. Now, most of Israel, when we talk about it being Jerusalem, being on the west side of the Jordan River, across the Jordan and up north a little bit is going to be Bashan, which would be in the area that we would call Israel. And so anyways, all the areas, so describing this area from basically kind of far away to very, very close that this destruction is coming. Now, if it's and there's a raging fire that's taking out the trees, nothing can stop it. The point is it's making a beeline to Jerusalem. Even though it's on the east side, it's really still making a beeline just because of the way you would travel through there. And so anyways, the concept here is understand something. There's great destruction coming, and it's demonstrated by the use of these trees that are going to be destroyed. And so anyways, it's a poetic way of saying destruction is on its way. It's very scary. Now, with that, there's a paragraph change. We go into verse number 3, because verse 3 is going to start giving some details now. So, broadly, destruction in a big way. Verse number 3 is going to be these object lessons that the prophet is going to give. Verse number 3, there's a voice of the howling of the shepherds, for their glory is spoiled, a voice of the roaring of young lions, for the pride of Jordan is spoiled. Thus saith the Lord my God, feed the flock of the slaughter. Now, what he tells them here then, in verse number 3, is going to start giving this illustration. What he points out is a few things. One has to do with the more personal side of it. He addresses first off the howling of the shepherds. These are the shepherds that their flock is being taken from them, for their glory is spoiled. And obviously a shepherd is not much good without its flock. And so this is what he's pointing, that flock is about to be destroyed. So we've noticed the progression from the trees in the neighboring countries, leading in specifically now to them and the flock, which is going to be describing the Jews there in that area as the flock. Now, it says a voice of the roaring of young lions. This is one of the ones I'm not sure about this one. It says the voice of the roaring of young lions, for the pride of Jordan is spoiled. I read one person that said that has to do with the lions that had occupied Jordan during that time. I don't think of big African lions, but it would be more like a mountain lion type thing. I don't know, and even still, I don't know what the significance of that is, except for the fact that I don't know. I have no idea. So the pride of Jordan is spoiled. The point is their great power is being brought down. That's the general idea. I don't know much more beyond that, as the trees are very obvious. The animals that are mentioned in verse 3 are a little different. Verse number 4, thus saith the Lord my God, feed the flock of the slaughter. And so Zechariah then says that God told him to do something, feed the flock of my slaughter. And he mentions something specifically about the flock. Now, the flock being the people. He's saying to them, look, you guys are gathered here together. There's this destruction coming, and with this destruction that is close, I mean, God is going to be working them with all the stuff that's going to be coming in, this great fire that's going to be raging, this judgment. He's saying, now feed them. The flock needs to be protected. You care for them, you take care of them. And so what he's saying then is to the prophet Zechariah, tell them and you feed them what they need. Now, this would be similar to the same language that Jesus asked of Peter. Peter, after the resurrection of Christ, while Christ still had a ministry here on this earth, they're out eating some fish that Jesus Christ had prepared, and I'd imagine that's probably pretty good eating. But anyways, they're sitting around eating. After they've eaten some, Jesus asks Peter, lovest thou me more than these? And we won't get into what these he's talking about. But the point is, what he tells them is to feed my sheep, to feed my lambs. The concept is you feed them, you take care of them. And this is a job for you to do. You take care of those people that need it. And so anyways, the concept here is there's a care that's necessary, and it relates to the fact that there are shepherds that should be taking care of the sheep. That's their job. You should feed them, you should protect them, because there's destruction coming. For us, we would think of it simply in regards to a shepherd that is out taking care of his sheep, that if there are those threats outside, you're protecting from them. You're making sure you feed them so that way they don't wander into places that would lead them into destruction. And this is what he's warning them of. And so what we're going to have then from here, verse number 5, all the way to verse 17, is going to be two shepherds that are going to... they're going to demonstrate specifically the shepherds that are going to be coming for them. And so anyways, in verse number 4, he describes them as feed the flock of the slaughter. The concept of that is that these are the flocks that are basically about to be killed. These are ones that are designed, these are slaughter flocks. I mean, they're there with the anticipation of being slaughtered. To me, honestly, if something is about to be slaughtered, not hugs before they go in to get finally slaughtered, and go give them some nice food. They don't need a last meal. He's saying take care of them because they're on their way to destruction. That is the inevitable, and you take care of them because where they're headed is final destruction. And by the way, when Jesus Christ came, and his next part he's going to illustrate the life of Christ in some manners, where when it comes to Jesus Christ came to the Jews, who many of them thought were fine. We have no problem because my father, Abraham, and we're good, and we don't need all this stuff, and we'll be fine. He says, no, you need me. You need me. And it has to be Christ alone. And yet what they have here in this, he's saying, I want you to talk to them because they are the flock of the slaughter. Oh, but we're Jews. No, you still need Christ is the problem. You might think, oh, well, but we're more special. And you need Christ. The whole point, the whole hope of glory had been Christ himself, had not been their bloodline. And so this is what's being provided for them. So he's saying, you, the flock, are a flock for slaughter. And that's what's going to be happening. And so anyways, in this next part, look at verse 5. Whose possessors slay them. Interesting terminology that's used because who owns them? Well, during this time, you have different people. The Medo-Persian Empire, really the Persians at this point had given them liberty to be there and had finance really for them to be there and given them protection and some stuff going on there. But they were no doubt, they didn't have possession of their own land. I mean, they were there. They occupied it. In fact, there's some unity in the fact that they were still occupying that land, but it was not truly theirs. They were no doubt under a Gentile rule during that time, and they continue on even all the way to the time of Christ, where you still have a foreign possession of them, and hold themselves not guilty. In verse number 5, who's not guilty? Is my cordless dying a little bit? Am I going in and out a little bit? Okay, let me switch over to this one. Let's switch over just to the blue. Okay, so am I good? You guys can hear me. All right, so anyways, what we have there is the possessors slay them and hold themselves not guilty, and they that sell them say, blessed be the Lord. For I am rich, and their own shepherds pity them not. And he's saying that the people that are responsible for caring for them and protecting them and warning them have no pity on them, while outside or foreign possessors would sell them. And when they would sell them, they would say a phrase, "Blessed be the Lord." Why? For I am rich. So in essence, we can say in some aspects, perhaps this could be pointing towards the slavery of the Jews that would take place. You'll find this both in 70 A.D. as well as 135, 136 A.D. as well, when the Jews are basically sold in mass, and they would mockingly say, "I am rich, bless the Lord, look how well I'm doing," because we're selling the Jews that are there. And so anyways, it says that their own shepherds pity them not. And so you'll find that there are shepherds, multiple shepherds, that are supposed to be taking care of them. Now, during the time of Christ, there was different groups of shepherds that were supposed to be leading them, right? For instance, you have the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin were comprised of two groups of what they would call themselves shepherds. This would be the Sadducees, who did not believe in a resurrection. It was kind of like here and now, only follow the Bible because here and now is all we got. And they were somewhat loyal to Rome, I guess, in some ways. They didn't like to be, but their high priest during the time of Christ was a high priest that was actually selected by the Roman government. So there was two high priests. One was kind of political, and one was the actual inheritor of the high priest. But Sadducee ruled. But yet the Pharisees were the more common of the group, but split about half of the Sanhedrin, or the ruling council. And these did believe in a resurrection. They even believed in a Messiah. But they rejected that Christ was that Messiah. And so anyways, these would be shepherds. But here's what it says. So it sounds good. And they have their synagogues. And by the way, others like the Herodians were those that were faithful to Herod, which, by the way, Herod would eventually just suddenly die randomly. Anybody remember that story in the book of Acts where Herod goes out, he makes some great speech, arrayed in all his kingly outfits and just speaking so well that all the people cried out, "This must be," the way he's talking, that this must be a god. And so God struck him down dead immediately, and he was eaten of worms. Just falls down and starts getting eaten of worms because he gave God not the glory. Just strikes him down suddenly. And so anyways, you have different groups of people, really mostly three groups of people, mostly political or two types of religious groups that are there. And anyways, with that, the shepherds, they don't pity the people. You see, the shepherds are fine because they're doing okay. They've got resources, they've got finances, they're fine. They're in power, but the people are suffering. People are being sold, the people are wasting. In verse number 6, "For I will no more pity the inhabitants of the land, saith the Lord. Below I will deliver the men, every one into his neighbor's hand, and into the hand of his king, and they shall smite the land, and out of their hand I will not deliver them. And I will feed the flock of slaughter." So once again, the same flock of slaughter from verse number 4. "I will feed the flock of slaughter." I got lost. Where was it? Verse number 7. "I will feed the flock of slaughter, even you, O poor of the flock. And I took unto me two staves, the one I called Beauty, and the other I called Bands, and I fed the flock." Now here's what he says, is that when it comes to this, with all the chaos that's going on, all the subjection from the outside that's ruling and causing havoc there in Israel and Jerusalem, and everything is going really, really bad. In the meantime, I'm going to feed the flock. Now the flock is completely aside from having any sort of hope whatsoever in all those outside shepherds, or of those outside possessors, or even the shepherds that are inside. But God says, I will feed them. I'm going to take care of the flock. And what a great picture during the time that Jesus Christ comes, which, by the way, he's illustrating Christ's coming. When Christ comes, he's saying, you're going to come here. And while a lot of them were saying, okay, he's going to come and relieve us of the oppressors that are going to come in, and he's going to come in with a mighty army, chapter number 11 should have indicated to them something. It wasn't going to be that way. The way he was going to save them was not because he was going to get rid of just all these oppressors instantly, but it's because he's going to feed us. He's going to give us that. And by the way, who's going to receive it? According to the passage that we just read in verse number 7, it was the poor. "And I will feed the flock of the slaughter, even you, O poor of the flock." And I love that, because when you find that word even, we can use the English words especially, I think sometimes, or specifically, oftentimes, to indicate what he's talking about. And so while Jesus Christ came, and he's preaching to everybody who would listen, not everybody got it. And he says that blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is what? The kingdom of heaven. Now, what he's addressing here, the kingdom, what he's talking about, they're the ones receiving. Those that are poor in spirit, they're the ones that get it. They get it. He's feeding all of them, but not all of them will get it. And as he gives them, they're going to get it. And so he says, well, I want to show you something. I want to feed you. And so he says, he takes out these two these two staves is what he calls them in verse number 7, right in the middle. I took unto me two staves, and one I called beauty, and the other I called bands, and I fed the flock. Now, for us, it's kind of a weird thing. The best illustration that I can come up with in my mind, okay, and this may be a very poor illustration, but I used to, when I was a kid, we used to study like Egyptian history, and we'd see the false gods of Egypt and stuff like that, and we'd spend like months studying that, and we get one page on Christianity, and then go back to Egypt and false gods in the Greeks, sorry. And then anyways, but one of the things that I found was interesting about a number of those cultures is that oftentimes the leaders held some kind of stick or staff. And the Egyptians specifically, when they would be mummified, they'd oftentimes be mummified with their arms crossed, and they'd be holding a staff on one side, looked like a shepherd's staff, and then some kind of other staff on the other side, which typically would have to do with like a spear or sword or something like that, or arrow. And the concept was that there was feeding, and then there was protection. And so that's what they did. And what he says, now Jesus, when he comes, well, here's what he has for them. He has a couple things for them. One, he has beauty, and he has bands. Now, the term bands would be kind of the idea of unifying, brotherhood. These are things that are close together. You look at the terminology, and it has the idea of unity. Now, it's not unity in the sense of like, well, everybody's getting along, but literally being stayed together. It's being placed together. The idea of beauty would be beauty. I think it's a great word for it. What we find with this has to do with just, and I believe the word beauty is perfect for this, but the concept I want to address here is this giving of God, this graciousness. I think you can apply the word grace in this graciousness specifically, this beauty of this great love and demonstration. God is saying, I'm feeding you with this great grace and bands, this unifyingness around him. And this is what he's going to do. And it sounds really good, but Jesus comes and he's got this. He gives and he preaches this gospel of grace in what he's doing. And the bands, he's going to be the one that's going to provide those things. And he says, I fed the flock. And then verse number 8, this random verse is put there. And I really struggled with this one. 3 shepherds also I cut off in 1 month. And my soul loathed them, and their soul also abhorred me. So the best way I can say this, I had mentioned Sunday, the idea of hating has more to do with the action involved. Loathing would be that emotional tie there. And so when it comes to this here, yes, there is aspects that he would make decisions of judgment. For instance, judgments are decisions of hatred. For instance, when Jesus would cast people into the lake of fire, that's a decision of an action. It's an execution of sorts. And yet with this one, he says, I loathed them, and they abhorred me. And so there's this emotional hatred for each other. And he says that I cut off these shepherds. The concept, they're removed. They were separated. Best way I can say it, they were killed. Seemingly, that's what it means. Now, I'm not sure who that was. And so, based on the fact that this whole section seems to be pointing to the time of Christ, here's his ministry here on earth, it seems that either three specific leaders. It could be the Pharisees and Sadducees and the Herodians. It could be Herod himself, who was randomly killed, and maybe the high priest, who also was randomly removed. And so it could have been the time frame. I don't know, but we do know this, that there was people that hated Jesus, and he didn't like them either. In fact, he says that he loathed them. This doesn't mean that he kind of disliked them. He was against them, and so he cut them off. And anyways, in the middle, for the sake of feeding his flock. In verse number 9, then said I will not feed you that dieth, let it die, and that is to be cut off, let it be cut off, and let the rest eat every one the flesh of another. Now, this, I believe, is pointing to the fact that when Jesus Christ came and he feeds the flock, and you have the shepherds, that he cuts them off. It's not just that he cuts them off, but what you have here is that he himself has also been abhorred by the flock that he's feeding. Now, the poor got it. Now, it doesn't say just the poor in the sense that they're economically downtrodden, but specifically they're poor in spirit is what Jesus would describe it as. And so anyways, with this overall rejection of him, what he says then is, all right, we're done. We're done. the aspect in which he records in verse number 9 is that this is going to be a finishing with great destruction. The concept is not just that he's going to kill them, but more so in that he will let them die. If you were to go back to the Mosaic covenant that you'll find in the Bible, the book of Exodus describes this covenant in that the reception of the great promises that are given to Abraham would be driven through a manner of a certain type of covenant in which they were supposed to fulfill the law in order to maintain. With that, God promised that he would provide his protection, and he would protect them. And then as they go into battle, one guy would be able to fight off 1,000. But if they were against God and they were not obeying, then one enemy can fight off 1,000 of his own people. And so this is one thing that was very important. So the idea here in verse number 9 is that there's a destruction that's going to come by him just removing his hands. I have this for you, but I'm going to remove my hands and I'm going to let this destruction come. I do believe this is addressing a specific time period in history where he is going to now allow these things to happen. And we'll address it more as we go throughout the chapter. I think you'll see it in a better picture. In verse number 10, he goes with this illustration. He had these two staves, these two sticks, and I took my staff, even beauty. Remember, there's beauty and there's bands. I took my staff, even beauty, and I cut it asunder. Cut it off. That I might break my covenant which I had made with all the people. He said I had a covenant, specifically the Mosaic covenant. In fact, the book of Jeremiah records this to be true, that there is going to be a new covenant that's coming. But he says, all right, here it is. It's done. The Mosaic covenant is over. When Jesus Christ came, Mosaic covenant ended. In fact, the book of Hebrews describes the arrival of the new covenant as far as what that was. But the reason for that, as far as this part goes, now we understand that was a plan of God. It wasn't plan B for him to have a new covenant. But with this, what we have is that God is ending something for them because of the rejection of the one who would have made it all happen. That it was Christ. In verse number 11, and it was broken in that day. And so the poor of the flock that waited upon me knew that it was the word of the Lord. And so what he explains to them here is that they have rejected Jesus Christ. Now, when did this rejection come? You can say, well, it came all throughout the life of Jesus Christ. I believe specifically the day in which this happens, the day that this all ended was specifically at the day that they chose as a nation to crucify Jesus. And part of the inclination for me to believe that has to do with earlier in the passage in verse number 6, when it describes the fact that they are delivered into the hand of his king. In other words, the individuals into their king. The Jews didn't have a king, right? But if you remember, when Jesus was brought before them, and they asked the question about Jesus. What should I do with Jesus? What should I do with your king, is what he asks them. Should I crucify your king? He says, they replied at the leadership and as the urging of the high priest, they said, we have no king. They don't end there, do they? But Caesar. We have a king. We have Caesar. That's what they said. Now beforehand, God said, no king. There's only one king. And they said, all right, now we have Caesar. And so now they have rejected Christ and they've embraced another. And so they're going to be delivered into the hand of Caesar. Now, verse 5 and 6 is kind of a parentheses of what's going to happen in the next portion of Scripture here. But what he's addressing here is they made this, and finally that was it. All right, full rejection. So it's broken, and people knew it. The poor knew it. In verse number 12, and I said unto them, if ye think good, give me my price. And if not, forbear. So they weighed for my price 30 pieces of silver. Now, what he's saying here is, so I gave him this prophecy. When I gave him this prophecy, I asked them a question. Okay, so all right, I'm done. Do you guys want to go ahead and pay me now for it? And by the way, if you don't want to pay me, you don't have to pay me. It's kind of the way the verse is laid out. And they said, oh, okay, no, we will. And what they did, they paid him 30 pieces of silver. In the book of Exodus, it describes what happens if a servant is mauled by an ox. Somebody's got to be remunerated because somebody has to be paid because that is an employee. There's a financial loss, and so you've got to pay for that mauled servant. Now, a servant was typically a fairly low price, and once they're mauled, they're definitely worth less. And so, what's the cost? 30 pieces of silver. So really, it's a slap in the face. All right, I'll give you 30 pieces of silver, and they gave him 30 pieces of silver. Now, he's telling them this great burden. Now, we've only done chapter 11, but remember, chapter 9, 10, and 11 all together. This is a really long thing. He's been going at it for a while. He says, all right, go ahead and pay me. They pay him 30 pieces of silver. And so this 30 pieces of silver is also prophecy that God is laying out, because in the next verse, verse 13, and the Lord said unto me, cast it unto the potter, a goodly price that I was prized out of them. And I took the 30 pieces of silver and cast them to the potter in the house of the Lord. And so the money's cast. Now, ultimately, we know that Judas will eventually betray Jesus Christ, and the way in which he's betrayed is going to be by paying Judas 30 pieces of silver. Judas, with some sort of guilt of some kind, knowing that he couldn't live with himself, having betrayed Christ for 30 pieces of silver, eventually goes back after that and casts it to the Sanhedrin, says, take it, I don't want it. And they said, we can't have it. And so he goes and finds a potter's field, and he kills himself. And the scripture will give more detail on that. They said, we don't know what to do with it. What do we do? This is blood money now. We can't have this here for worship of God. And so they took 30 pieces of silver, and they bought that piece of land where Judas hung himself in that potter's field. And that potter's field, which had the blood of the one who betrayed Christ, that was what it was spent for. Not a good piece of land. And it would have been near an area called Gehenna, and a very terrible area of that area. And so anyways, all that being said, this is prophesying something. So the details, I mean, it's incredible. The detail, not only what he's saying to tell them, the illustration, and then even the payment, they rejected. In other words, 30 pieces, they were rejecting the prophet here. They were rejecting him. And even the idea that a lot of people, only the poor in spirit would understand Jesus later on, they're right here. This is the poor in spirit. They're getting this. And some people are saying no. In fact, a lot of people are going from chapter number 9. We start seeing that some people are giving them prophecies and utterances and divinations that are telling them, you can trust pretty much everything. You'll be fine. Everything's going to be great. Don't worry about it. And he's saying, no, I've got a plan. You got to trust God only. And so in this one, then, they've rejected the prophets, gave them 30 pieces of silver, which are cast then to the potter. In verse number 14, we're going to see an expansion on this. So you have beauty that's been cut asunder. In verse number 14, then I cut asunder mine other staff, even bands, this thing that held it together. This idea of unity or holding to togetherness, I think, would be okay. Unity is not exactly the term for bands. That I might break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. Now, it's interesting that it mentions the brotherhood between Judah and Israel, because during the time of Zechariah, Judah and Israel were not together. That wasn't one nation, all right? So that went all the way back to Rehoboam, hundreds of years previously, where the nation had been divided. During the time of Christ, Israel was not around. You didn't have Judah and Israel together. It was just Judah. And so he says then, but we're going to break this apart. And what's interesting about that is, even though Judah was the lone tribe remaining, you still actually had tribes that were there. We see this in a couple ways. For one, while it's only called Judah, we have to remember that Jesus Christ was born where? In Bethlehem, right? Which is of what house and lineage? Of David, which is where? Of which tribe? Of Judah, right? And so, but that whole area, if you look at it in the way it describes Judah, but we're going to see further more, it's going to be tied into Benjamin. And working in a temple, you're going to have one who is, in her lineage, is of Asher. And so you have the tribes that are somewhat preserved that are there, but they're all described just basically as Judah. Judah, everything's just called Judah at this point. Now, all that's there, and they're banded together. That's all it is. They're banded together into whatever's left remaining there. And what he says is, that's gone. That's done. In verse number 15, he explains how this is going to work. And the Lord said unto me, take unto thee yet the instrument of a foolish shepherd. Now, with this, I don't know what the foolish shepherd instruments are. All right, so you have the good shepherd that's got peace and beauty. And then this one, you have the instruments of a foolish shepherd. I don't know what that is. But some kind of instruments that have a foolish shepherd, or something bad for the foolish shepherd. In verse number 16, it says, for lo, I will raise up a shepherd in the land. So once again, there's going to be a new shepherd that's going to come up in the land. It's going to be raised up by God himself. It's going to allow the shepherd to be raised up. Which shall not visit, in other words, not care for instance, the book of James talks about true religion and undefiled, pure religion undefiled, visiting the fatherless and the widow. This would be that concept of caring for, meeting the needs, making sure you're making those visits to do something about it. To not visit those that be cut off, or removed. Neither shall seek the young one, the vulnerable, nor heal that is broken, nor feed that standeth still. But he shall eat the flesh of the fat and tear their claws in pieces. And here's what he says, is that there's going to be one, a shepherd that's going to come. This would be a ruling person. This is going to be somebody that's going to be in charge, and he's going to take advantage. But it's going to be right there, and they're going to go for this guy. And Jesus talks about that in the book of John. He describes the fact that when one comes in the name of God, they will not. Jesus came in the name of God, and they rejected him. But there's going to be, if that one would come in their own name, that one they would accept. And likewise, there will be one that will come in his own name, and that will be what we would describe as the Antichrist, the man of sin, man of perdition. This is one that's going to be coming, and this is one that God's going to allow to be raised up. So you have Jesus, the good shepherd, they reject. They say, no. Peace, the bands, gone. Beauty and bands, destroyed, but there will be this new one that's going to come. And this new one's going to be specifically an Antichrist. The book of 1 John describes the spirit of Antichrist being one that would deny Christ himself, suggesting, confessing not that Jesus is the Christ. And so it wasn't Jesus the Messiah, so there's going to be one that will reject the fact that Jesus was the Messiah. So it's not just an issue where they don't know about it, secular history. They're rejecting Christ as being the Messiah. This is the spirit of Antichrist. The Bible describing him that he's going to be coming. He's not going to care for them. He's not going to feed them. He's not going to do actually anything substantive. I guarantee, in fact, I'm pretty confident that he will provide something, but it won't be what they need. It won't be that feeding. And instead, what he's going to do, he's going to destroy them. And so partly what we're looking at here is that when it comes to the Antichrist, part of his job is going to be judgment that's going to be exacted specifically there on the children of Israel. In verse number 17, the Bible says, "Woe to the idle shepherd that leaveth the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm," so his strength is going to be cut off, "and upon his right eye." Oftentimes the sword shall be upon his arm, and upon his right eye, his arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly dark. And the concept of wisdom or judgment even will be cut off, so no ruling even on him. And so anyways, this idea is destruction. So a really quick way, verse number 15 through number 17 is going to describe Antichrist is coming, but I'm going to beat him up real quick, and so I'm going to destroy him, and he'll be done. And so this is it. Now, we're not going to go into the full context in regards to the Antichrist and to the man of sin. We did that a few months ago back with Daniel. But anyways, this is what he's addressing, that because they rejected Christ, this group of people is going to accept somebody else, and this is a scary thing. Now, in chapter 12 through 14, it's going to describe then, well, okay, wasn't this supposed to be hope? Wasn't this the motivator to go build this temple? This sounds really chaotic and devastating. And the point is with very little hope. But in chapter 12 and 14, it's going to point to something that's going to happen next. And so it doesn't just end with the Antichrist winning. It's not where it ends at all. And that's what we're going to see taking place next. But anyways, there's a question as far as who he is. Came up with a couple ideas as far as who the Antichrist is. And so these will be good for you to write down. If you were to, I'm just kidding on that one. If you were to take if you're a numerologist at all and you give numerical values to different letters, you can take the name Henry Kissinger and removing some of the letters that don't have a numerical value, it will actually come up to the number 6, 6, and 6. Saw one more that suggested that when it comes to the 666, has to do with carbon, because it's made of 6, the element carbon, which we are carbon-based is what they would tell you in science, or so I'm told. It's 6 electrons, 6 protons, and 6 neutrons. And so, obviously, it's just people. There's a computer in Belarus that has the Project 666, which has to do with the registration of all people. So they were saying then it must be the computers that are the Antichrist. The Pope, one of his titles is Vicarius Filii Dei, which, once again, you take the numerical value, it drops it down to 666. Now, one other one was my nephew was born June 6th, so the 6th month of 6th day, 6th month of 2006. So I thought, well, maybe. No, actually, no, he was the 5th, wasn't he? He missed it by a day. The 7th, okay, so you never know. I think they're lying. No, but he's a good kid. So the point, we don't know who it is, but he says something specifically. This shepherd's going to come up as a false hope. It's a false shepherd because the one hope was Jesus Christ. That was it. And anyways, that's what he's given them. So again, it's confusing in many regards. This is what I got for you. I've loved Zechariah, but I'm looking forward to the next burden. It's a little easier. So anyways, this burden was a little bit harder. Chapter 12, I say a little easier, the next burden. generally, but it's because it's like generally this is what's going to happen, and it's still very, very broad, but a little bit more exact, a little less poetic in some ways. And so, anyways, that's what we find here in Zechariah chapter number 11. All right, let's go ahead and we'll take a time and pray, and then we'll take our offering, and then we'll pray together as a church. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for the time you've given. Lord, we ask your time of blessing on us as a church now, that we would be able to take this, Lord. I know many ways we're learning things and we're seeing things, reading things, Father, that as we see them, there's sometimes difficulty in understanding. Lord, I truly believe, Lord, I believe that in the first century, in the 30s of this of the time that your Son walked upon the earth, Lord, I believe that people could look to Zechariah and seen that this is what Jesus was. Lord, they would have seen it at the moment. They would have known this is him. God, and I believe that. And Lord, I believe that there's going to be days coming ahead which believers will see. We'll see the scriptures and know exactly what you're talking about. And Lord, I'm praying, Father, as we look at this now, Lord, to realize that we would remember there is no other hope, and many people offer hope. Many people were going to try to take that position, Lord, and I know that even in Israel now there's a new prime minister and the work and the hope that people have, Father, but to remember that Christ truly is our only hope. So, Lord, would you please give direction and wisdom as we look to apply and understand Scripture, that we would have a greater confidence in you and a greater help in understanding the whole Bible, because we understand some more pieces a little better as well because of tonight. Give your blessing now on the rest of the service. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, if we can take our offering.